was that New Year's that was the first time that we sort of stopped, properly downed oars, poured a whiskey, everybody sort of sat back, and I think all three of us just went, oh wow, okay, like this is pretty special. This is unbelievable sunset, obviously, nothing else in sight, and just the three of us out in the boat.
Okay, so this is an interesting episode, getting three people together that have done something that a lot of people wouldn't even dare to do, and that is to row the Atlantic. And I remember I found out this story because I met you, Martin, in a bar in Hong Kong, and was like completely enthralled by what you guys have actually set out to do. So there is always a story behind why three guys still decide to do something absolutely crazy. And it normally involves a number of drinks and a very drunken occasion. So how did the idea about rowing the Atlantic come to fruition?
Well, I think it came up in a group chat we're all on. And some friends of mine had done it a couple of years before us, or rather, it was 2020 this was, so they'd just done it. And it just sort of came up, and I said, look, I'd love to do this. Does anyone fancy sort of looking into it a bit more? And instead of being told to bugger off, these guys sort of said they were really keen. And that's how it all began.
Was there any doubts? Was it sort of peer pressure, Martin and Matt? Where like Rob says, I want to do this, and sort of like, I want to live up to this, or were you like quite certain about doing this?
Yeah, well, it was on a WhatsApp group, so we were sort of talking and probably hyping each other up quite a bit. Rob had actually mentioned it a few times previously, and we had all sort of blown him off and be like, no chance of ever doing that. And I think probably, it was early days of COVID lockdowns and restrictions. Chatting about it on the group, and probably got a little bit excited, and then next thing you know, we'd all committed to this thing.
Yeah, I will caveat that there were a couple of beers the night before and the week before that when Robert mentioned it before, and the week before that when Robert mentioned it again. So there was a little bit of strong arming, peer pressuring, and a little bit of bounce before we got into it.
You seemed pretty determined to have this thing happen. Like, Rob, what was it that made you want to do this?
I made a few things. Like, I think, as I said, some good friends of mine had done it, and I'd sort of followed their journey quite closely, and heard about the experience that they'd had. And while by no means did they love every second of it, they did say afterwards what an incredible thing to do it was. I think that combined with the fact that I'd been out in Hong Kong for a couple of years, having left the military at home, where there was always something different. There was always the next adventure. There was always like the next challenge ahead of me, pretty much just sort of laid out for me. And I think I was, looking to do something that challenged me, looking to do something a bit bigger than just sort of, Monday to Friday work and a bit of rugby at the weekend. So I think that was quite a big part of it for me. And like Martin said, it was the start of COVID. Things were looking like they might lock down a bit. Like travel wasn't looking that good. I think so. There was quite a lot of things that came together that made me sort of keen in that moment and feel like it was the right time to give it a crack if I was going to.
Is this something you've done regularly, being in the military back home? Are you used to sort of like fairly big physical endeavours, or is this the first thing of its kind that you've done?
No, I mean, obviously the sort of training courses and that sort of thing in the military, but no, I hadn't done sort of a big expedition or anything like that, so to speak. No.
What about the rest of you guys? Is there anything in the run up that you've done prior? I mean, did you guys know how to row?
None of us knew how to row.
Good start.
Yeah. We all sort of fairly decent on the erg. The funny thing about the race, I would say, almost most of the people that do it are actually not rowers. Probably for good reason, because I think anyone who was a rower probably understands that rowing 30 to 40 days in the ocean will not be very enjoyable.
So, go on.
Yeah. Sorry. So I think we all had sort of slightly different but slightly similar reasons for doing this. The sort of challenge of doing something bigger than us, or understanding where your sort of physical and mental limits are, is sort of a common theme that sort of I think ran through the three of us. Yeah, and that's why we went after it.
Yeah, I can totally relate to things like that. I mean, I was saying to the guys off air once we were dealing with technical difficulties, that I walked about 10 years ago now, walked the length of Wales for charity. Nowhere near as like hard and scary as what you guys went through, but I remember like that is one of those moments, a defining moment in my life of like whenever I think something gets hard, you know you can always push that little bit further. And I'm so glad I did that. And I remember reading on Martin's post of like, wasn't necessarily a fun experience all the way through, but it was a defining experience. I'm assuming that's the kind of thing you were probably meaning.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, similar to Rob, I didn't really have a conventional 20s. I played rugby throughout pretty much my whole 20s in South Africa, moved over to Hong Kong, sort of transitioned away from that into a more corporate life, play a bit of rugby on the weekends, part-time, but not really, not being as challenged as I had done before. So, similar reasons. I completely forgot my train of thought now.
But yes, not fun, Simon.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Sorry.
16 hours.
Gone through a lot of sort of pre-seasons and that sort of thing that were tough, but you always got, you got to go home and sleep for 8 hours, have a good meal, have your comforts, have a rest. Whereas this was just completely unique in the challenge in that you were, you're never sleeping for an hour at any given stretch. You're doing essentially 14 hours of exercise over a 24-hour period. Just very unique and something just would never do in an ordinary sort of training environment.
I remember like say doing the walk, and someone who'd done that before said to me, he goes, "What you'll never appreciate a good pub meal like when you come back, when you're just sort of used to camping stove food." And I was thinking when I was coming to this, because this is the closest parallel that I have. I was like, well, I could find every 3-4 days, I could find somewhere that has a good pub that I could stop off. There isn't many local pubs in the middle of the Atlantic. You really you're all in and lost in the middle of the ocean, like hoping that you're going in the right direction. But considering the fact that none of you rode, what did the run-up look like? How did you train for this? Did you train for this, or did you just sort of hope it was all right on the night?
Hit and hope. No, we had we signed up in April 2020. COVID had sort of kicked off, obviously. We expected to have a rugby season to get through at the end of that year. So a lot of the focus initially was on, getting really courses done and, starting to sort of line up sponsors. And then at the end of 2020, obviously we had a seriously curtailed rugby season. And so it was really only sort of January, February 2021, we engaged guys at Joint Dynamics who agreed to train us. And that's when we sort of focused on a lot more of the rowing type training. We also partnered with the guys at the Hong Kong Yacht Club, Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club, who kindly agreed to train us how to row. So it was the next sort of few months of down on Sundays at Middle Island and trying not to fall out of very small rowing boats, basically.
There's a question. There's a very question I was going to ask. Actually, it's a bit of a tangent where I was going next. But you had the guys help from Joint Dynamics. You had the guys at the Yacht Club helping you. Like, how did you go about sort of like creating these connections? 'Cause a lot of people would want to do something like this, but wouldn't know where to look for help. But you managed to seem to network and find the right people quite well.
Yeah, I think.
I think we. Yeah, Rob, you go.
No, you carry
on. I mean, Rob having his mates that had done it, we had some good connections there, and they had an ocean rowing coach. He had to work with us remotely. Initially, the plan was for him to come join us here in Hong Kong, but with the way things went with COVID, he was not able to join us. So we did that all remotely, and that sort of gave us a lot of sort of tips and tricks about the race, because half the prep is just learning to live on the boat and getting small little things that just make life a lot more bearable. And then the connections here, Dave at Joint Dynamics, we had met, one of our members had met through different connections. We knew he was quite into these sort of extreme challenges. It was, to be honest, it wasn't just approach one person and they all said yes. We did shop around. We tried to get people to agree to help us. Getting sponsors, getting support was was a process. It was almost like a full-time job.
Yeah. There's also, obviously the Hong Kong network is amazing. You do get to meet people. And one thing, Rob said with, and I think Martin also mentioned, with COVID, sort of stars aligned in terms of giving us time. We weren't traveling, that kind of thing. But at the same time, you're asking people in sort of COVID times of lockdown and health crises and all of that, asking people to, come and support or, sponsor or give to charity for 3 dudes trying to gallivant across the Atlantic presented a challenge as well.
So is there much of a strategy at place to this, or is it just sort of like a pure endurance race?
There's not too much strategy to it beyond just row as much and as hard as you can. We had a guy doing our weather routing, so to that extent, you set off from La Gomera and go straight across to Antigua, and you can go in a straight line, or you can try and go in a straight line, but the weather might be more favourable to go south to start with and then turn across, try and pick up the trade winds. So I suppose in that sense, there is a strategy. And as a team of 3, we could structure our rowing and rest differently if we wanted to. But generally, it was just, trying to maximise the amount of time on the oars, maximise the amount of time there were 2 of us on the oars, whilst striking a balance between getting the rest that you need, being able to get your nutrition in, all that sort of stuff. So I mean, yeah, some small bits of strategy, but mostly just dig in and keep going for as long and as hard as you can.
So what was it that made you go, before we go into the actual race itself, what made you choose Child Fund Rugby as your sponsor? Who's the connection with that, and why that charity out of all the amazing charities you could have chosen?
We'd had a bit of connection through them, through members of our rugby club, Valley Rugby Club. Guys had worked with them before. A friend of ours had played the world's longest golf hole, from Eastern Mongolia to Western Mongolia. And yeah, 2 of our friends, one guy was actually the player, and the other guy was the caddy carrying the supplies and the tents and the water and all sorts. So we'd sort of had an interaction with them there. They'd obviously been fundraising those guys had been fundraising for Child Fund Rugby. We also, there were a couple of other connections of people we knew that worked for them. And when we had a chat, we sort of had a couple of ideas of who we might like to work with. But when we chatted to the guys from Child Fund Rugby, it just, the enthusiasm and the sort of connection of story between us all meeting, playing rugby, and them delivering their program through Tag Rugby just made a whole lot of sense. And they had really good metrics around how they track their dollars, where their money goes. They have sort of tangible outputs that they spend a lot of time working out. So for us, it was just it's very visible, and it was just a great story run by really, really good people.
That's it's good to hear as well. It's a really sort of unique charity, not the one you normally hear, but such a as someone that's played rugby all his life, it really struck a chord with me of getting people into the incredible sport that is rugby, and the lessons that I know it's taught me as an adult. I think it's a really good charity to kind of go through with. So going on to the race itself, like you mentioned sort of working in shifts. Like, did this work? Like, was there a system in place of how long you actually spent resting and actually oaring, or was there times where all had to be all hands on deck?
Be careful how you say time oaring, but yeah.
Yes, yeah. Is there a better term? Rowing, I suppose.
Our default structure was to go 2 hours 20 on, an hour and 40 off, which translates into sort of 14 hours on the oars a day over a 24-hour period. We did mix it up a little bit in that we would sometimes give ourselves a little bit more rest in the nighttime shifts, just because that's when you're going to get your best sleep. During the day, it ended up getting very, very hot. So firstly you're doing half shifts, but the trouble with that is then you're also doing half rest, so you don't really get enough time to sleep. So we'd mix it up, but our default pattern was to really do 2 hours 20 on, hour and 40 off, and that's pretty much throughout.
So going into the challenge itself, What if I was asking each of you, what do you think the hardest moment of the entire 37 days was for each of you?
I think it's probably slightly different for all of us. But probably from day 1 to about day 37, I found the hardest. No, I think it varies. I know from my perspective, I really struggle towards the end. We've sort of been rowing for sort of 27 days at that stage. Some stuff had happened that had meant we'd hit some bad weather, and the team that were chasing us had hit some really good weather, and we got into like a serious foot race. And after 27 days, being asked to like dig deeper and row harder I just found very mentally challenging. And you kind of, your mind just starts, trying to trick you or trying to talk you out of things and be quite negative. It was, I luckily had 2 teammates who weren't going through that same thing at the time, so were able to talk me out of it. But just be able to commit down and push hard for those last 10 days, I found pretty tough, to be honest.
Do you think the biggest thing that allowed you to dig was the 2 other guys on this call to help you through it, or is there other things that helped push you through when it was getting tough towards the end?
I think our team dynamic was always one of our strengths. We 3 good mates, and we sort of had said before, what is our biggest fear is letting each other down. So you just knew at the start of every shift, you had to be on time, you had to be giving it your all. You had to be all there and all focused. But yeah, Martin and Rob in those 10 days both said to me in various forms, like, I know 10 days seems a lot, but 10 days in the rest of your life. And, while nobody else might care that you've finished in this position or you've done this, like, you will know. And that sort of just kept telling myself that for 10 days until we finally hit land.
How about you, Martin? What was the hardest moment for you?
Well, I think Matt kind of alluded to it earlier. It is quite difficult to pinpoint one specific moment just because it is just so long. Like, you'll never do 37 days, a 37-day challenge again, really. It's just such a long period. Saying that, there was one moment where, just because we were a 3-man team, it's quite difficult to balance the boat. And at times you'll be nose heavy, at times you'll be tail heavy. And the times we were nose heavy, the weather sort of picked up a little bit, probably about 20 days in. And we're getting knocked about. And because we were nose heavy, the rudder just wasn't really taking, and we just couldn't get that right. And you've got this off-course alarm as part of your equipment on the boat, and it's the most infuriating high-pitched noise that you could ever imagine, and it just beeps. And there were times where probably for 3 of 5 hours it was going off. It was infuriating, and it's just so soul-destroying. So I'd probably say that whole time when we were getting knocked off course, it would really be able to correct it. Probably toughest by
modern day torture.
I'm laughing about it now, but I think I'm probably exactly the same. And at the time, there was nothing funny about getting in the stern cabin to try and keep the weight that end, and like turning the light off and closing your eyes, and then that fucking alarm going off again, and having to sit up and reach out and turn it off, because like the other 2 are rowing, they can't reach to turn it off or anything. But yeah, that was pretty. I think a combination of what the other 2 have said. Like there are some dark moments. Like there are some tough moments. And again, as you said, and as Matt said, like it's all about getting up for the other 2 guys. Like you're not gonna put in a shit shift. You're not gonna not get out of bed and get on with it, because if you do, you're going to let the other 2 down. And I think we cared so much about doing that for each other that was what got us through. I think through those rough times. Plus the fact you finish Antiga, and the faster you row, the faster you get there.
Another aspect to that, I think Matt kind of mentioned it though, is we're all pretty competitive guys, and we said we were in the 3-man division of the race, and one of our goals was to win that. And yeah, there was never really a question that that's something we were always going to push as hard as we could for. So that was a big motivating factor for us.
Yeah.
Do you think that sort of stuck with you guys a little bit, that ability to push hard? I mean, I always compare it to like me working as a coach and personal trainer, whenever I go and get a personal training session myself and I'm pushed to the limit on a leg session, you go into your own training session with an extra 5%. And I can imagine something this difficult is something that you go into life with that extra 5%. Is it something that sticks with you in terms of that being able to push through, or does it not translate? Is it just totally alien to the rest of the world?
I think it. I don't know if it translates exactly the way you've described it, but I think for me, what it does, every time you sort of reset, you almost like reset your perspective on what's difficult, what's hard, what's achievable, and those things. And I think not just talking about physically on the row. I think all the stuff we went through to get to the start line, which we haven't really talked about much, but it's like that old poster with the iceberg, like the bit showing is the row we did, but actually the amount of stuff that we went through to try and get to the start line was probably a bigger challenge in a lot of ways. So I think you do take away from it the ability, that sort of resilience, and the ability to just trust yourself and trust each other to go and work out how to solve a problem. Like we didn't know how to ship a boat from one side of the world to the other, and then we didn't know how to overcome a shipping crisis and get it back. But through asking for help and through talking to people and trying to work all these things out, there's a lot to be learned. And I think these things, it resets your perspective of what's difficult and what's achievable, and that's something I'd like to think I carry forward. Yeah.
I suppose, do you feel a deadline helped with those sort of things prior to the race? Because there was this absolutely non-negotiable, unmovable deadline, that some of the things you had to work out, if it was other aspects of your life, you might go, okay, it's not that important, it's not a priority. But you knew it had to be, because you can't row very far without a boat. You're not going to want to be swimming in the Atlantic.
Probably. I think that the one thing we also did, I mean, rightly or wrongly or intentionally or otherwise, was kind of start telling people that we were going to do it as much as possible. So once we've told people we have to do it, kind of thing. So I think it was less, the deadline maybe did help. And I guess, it being, if our boat wasn't there on the 12th, then we couldn't have done it. But if we were doing it just off our own bat, we could have gone on the 18th as opposed to the 12th, which I suppose does help. But it didn't really, I didn't sit in the forefront of my mind that it would be so much better if we were doing this on our own, because we could do it at any stage. Like, that was what we signed up for, and that's what we kind of got.
Mm. So you mentioned at some point, and if you were the weather taking you guys off course. I mean, like, what was that like being in? It's an impressive rowing boat. It's bigger than the little wooden thing you see, in cartoons. But like, that must have been a scary experience when there's a storm blowing. Was there any chance of you going over? Does this happen? And then what does it feel like being in the middle of a storm with no land in sight?
So the boats are obviously specially designed for this. They're made by a company in the UK for this event. So they are actually pretty well designed to deal with big seas, to deal with this sort of stuff. They can capsize, and teams have done. I think the closest we came was being shunted sideways pretty hard once or twice. That sort of knocked us off our seats maybe. But no, we weren't really that close to coming over. To be honest with you, the worst experience we had weather-wise was probably off the coast of Hong Kong when we were training. The first time we ever went out, we were pretty cowboy-esque with it, really. We didn't really know what we were doing. We hadn't had any coaching, really. And we just paddled out on a nice Friday evening, which rapidly turned into a sort of minor hurricane. So we found ourselves off the coast, being blown away from Hong Kong. It's probably a good thing looking back. But being blown away from Hong Kong and trying to row back, the wind turning us around on the spot, rain coming down, lightning getting ever closer. I think there was a moment me and Martin were on deck and sort of stood up looking at each other like, are we gonna put an anchor out here? But then there was sort of no choice. Like we had to get back to Hong Kong. So we spent, I think, 26 hours or so trying to row back to the yacht club, having taken about 3 hours to get out to where we were. That was honestly probably in terms of the weather, and just like genuinely, we didn't get any sleep. We had no rest really. Just trying to dig in and row back was maybe one of the most miserable moments on that boat. But a good learning curve, and a pretty steep one for us as well.
Was that a confidence knock going into like taking 3 hours to get somewhere, 26 hours to go back, and you hadn't even started the race yet? Like, did that knock any of your other guys' confidence? Like, okay, is this possible? Can we do this? Or was it just sort of like tunnel vision? We're making this work.
No, I think we were very much of the understanding that you will not get weather like that very often. The thing about the race, that the way they choose that, the reason they choose that route is that you've got the trade winds. So generally the weather is in some way favorable for you. It'll be off by a few degrees a lot of the time, but generally it's blowing you in the right direction. Whereas this was, we were just trying to battle the elements, and it did not go well.
Yeah, if anything, I think that sort of the recognition that like this might actually be the hardest we ever have to row, like even if you include the race, like that was, you sort of, I think maybe it was like 2 or 3 weeks in, and we were sort of chatting. We just like, yeah, that is still the hardest rowing we've ever had to do. Like, even though we're halfway across the Atlantic.
It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Your confidence boost. So you mentioned obviously sleeping in stints and having regular, 4 hours of sleep per night for such a long period of time. Everyone's told how important sleep is, and I don't think anyone really appreciates it until they go through a prolonged period of time with very, very little sleep. And by the sound of things, 4 hours is generous with that alarm going off. Like, did you notice the sleep deprivation affecting you as you went through the race? Whether that was focus, energy, performance, anything?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think the sleeping thing was probably the hardest thing to deal with. When you say 4 hours, I think that's very generous. I think towards the end of the race, when we couldn't sleep during the day because it was too hot, we were probably getting 2.5 to 3 over 24-hour period, which is, it's very, as you say, people say sleep's important. It's very contrary to every sort of fitness instruction, fitness book, any sort of like theories that you'll hear at all. Everything's about, get your sleep, you need it for recovery, etc., etc. What I found really interesting about the race is that you can row for 14 hours in a day and get 2.5 hours sleep, and for some reason still function. You get to an end of a 2.5 hour shift, you feel pretty stuffed. Your hamstrings playing up, your low back sore, and you think, how am I going to get on the oars again in an hour and a half? And you lie down, you get 45 minutes sleep, and you wake up, and for some reason the next shift's fine. It's just it's a very, very different and very contrary to sort of everything I understood about sleep and recovery prior to the race.
Do you reckon that's adrenaline will play a role in that, just because of the fact that you wake up, you're on a boat, you're not probably getting the best quality sleep, you're going to have to get up and do this again, and you're on a bit of a state of alert, like people picking the cars up off the kids when there's an accident that happens, you're just slightly on edge that powers you through.
As nice as it would be to think that you could rely on adrenaline for 37 days.
True.
I think that quite works out. But yeah, I think you just you just do what you have to do. Like, your body's ability to adapt and overcome these challenges is actually, when there is no choice, like you don't have a choice. You've just got to keep rowing, and the quicker you row, the better the faster time you make, the sooner you get to the end, the sooner you get to the end of the race. There's no like, just guys, we've got 30 days and then it's over. It's just a distance you've got to get through. And I think Martin said it there. It is amazing. Like, if tomorrow, or if right now, someone told me I had to go and row for 14 hours and sleep for 2 hours in the next 24 hours, like I don't think I could do it right now. Like anywhere but that situation where you're backed into a corner and you're forced to do it, then there's just something different about the way you handle it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's amazing how resilient you can be when you've got that deadline and no other option. If you turn around and go back, you still got to row back the other way. It's keep going, or there isn't really an alternative, I suppose, when you're that far in.
Yeah, there's not an all. You just
no.
row.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, with this, obviously, I think you've kind of answered this question because you mentioned how competitive you were. You mentioned how determined you were to win the 3-person race. Was there any doubts from any of you that you would actually finish it, or were you quite confident after having gone through that storm and you had your heart set on it? How did you feel going through that?
I think we'd always gone with the approach of there's a lot outside of your control, like mainly the weather, right? So and you can have, if one team picks a route 40 or 50 miles different to you, and they can have different weather to the weather you're having. So that was always going to be out of our control. So first primary goal, obviously finish the race. Secondary goal, win our category. And so, in order to do those, we can only do so much, and then, the weather's going to take care of the rest. So, I think we just really tried to put ourselves in as good a position as possible, and then the rest kind of takes care of the rest.
What about the other guys? Any doubts between others, or do you share the same sentiment?
Yeah, I don't think ever any. Yeah, I mean, never really any doubts as far as it's human nature. You kind of think the worst, but we did back ourselves. We're a pretty strong team, and as Rob said, I think as Matt said earlier, we had told a lot of people that we were doing this race, and I don't think we would have ever accepted anything than not finishing the race, because coming back to Hong Kong with our tails between our legs, having not done it would have probably been a bit of a bashed our pride a little bit.
Bashed our pride, and also we raising money for a charity here because people were donating, not just because of us, but they were donating because we said we were rowing the Atlantic. So it's a fair bit of pressure on that. I didn't want to have to go back to people and return their donation.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful motivator. The amazing thing when you're actually collecting money for charity. I keep drawing it back to say that my walk, I remember an embarrassing story that I often tell is that the first day I went, I met my mate who was going to go with that first half of the trip before he backed out, and we went and got food at this massive Tesco, and I was wearing my big hiking rucksack all day, and I completely forgotten I had it on because I just got so used to it. So his mum says, take the trolley back and we'll head back, get a good night's sleep before we set off to Prestatyn in the morning. What's the boy do when he gets the shopping trolley? He tries to ride the back of it, totally forgetting his counterbalance is this way. So I face plant the ground, cut my leg entirely open, and I had to do like 17, 18 mile hikes with a completely cut open leg and limping for the first 3 days. And I think I would have pushed it back if I hadn't had someone with me and money that was on the line in terms of people sponsoring me for charity. And it can push you further than you thought out of your comfort zone when you've got that riding on you.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's that sort of the combination of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. I think we predominantly it was something we wanted to do and a challenge we wanted to take on for our own reasons. But it certainly doesn't help having some external pressure to keep things going.
So one thing I've noticed the whole way through this is the bond that you guys face, like the expressions you guys say when you tell a story and things like this. And I remember reading Martin's post about this the other day, and he was saying that one of the things you were grateful for is that you guys ended up closer after this than when you went into this. And I one thing you've mentioned really struck a chord with me, that's not what every other team did. What is it you think that you managed to do, you three managed to do, that allowed you to stay close throughout this that other teams may have struggled with or not managed to do?
I think our outlooks on life are fairly similar. We went into it with an understanding, and we also did, a fair bit of, we spoke about it a lot. We spoke about what we're going to do when times get tough, what, how our approach will be. Yeah, as I said, we were very good mates before this and became closer as time went on. But I think the reason why we are good mates is that we share similar outlooks and similar values and that sort of thing. So we were fairly streamlined as a team. So when things did go wrong, there weren't these massive altercations or disagreements on things. We all had sort of, if we were pissed off, we were all pissed off together. If we were, having a good time, it was all together. So I think that helped. oftentimes, you get to see these mixed match teams that people that are very different, and perhaps when times get difficult, they don't really, their outlook doesn't really align that well.
I think also one of the things for me is like you have conflict in this race. Like that, you don't not sleep for 37 days and then not get pissed off with each other at certain times. But like the recognition that the set of circumstances are so unique, like just let it go. Like as soon as you can, just let it go. Like it's all water under the bridge at the end of the day. Like you're all pulling in the same direction. Like you're all trying to achieve something bigger than yourselves. Like, yes, we're bloody tired and we're exhausted and we're rowing and it's hot and like, yeah, okay, I've pissed someone off by doing this. Like, cool, it's done. Like once it's done, and you move past and you pull together.
Hmm. Do you think playing rugby to a degree helps this? Because I know it's a rugby match isn't necessarily the level of challenge of what this is, but I know I've had games, rugby matches where you feel down and out, you feel exhausted. One of you may be having a bad game, but you pick your team up and you carry on and you kind of push through. There's a doggedness to a game of rugby which doesn't come from most sports. Do you think that? I mean, I don't know how many rugby teams actually do this. It might all be rugby players, but do you feel that gives you a bond that maybe other people didn't have in the same way?
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah, I think the fact that I think I said it in one of our original things. It was, the fact that you have competed together, like you've had to rely on each other in that sort of physical, in that competition, in that space, definitely does help. But it's that's rugby helped. It's where our friendship was founded as well. But yeah, no, definitely, I do think it helped. I do think it sets us out. We understood what each other were like as competitors, and yeah, that certainly resonated and helped throughout.
To get an idea of the pace that you guys had to do 3,000 miles in 37 days, like in your stints, how many miles did you have to do per day? What was the sort of like the pace you were trying to keep?
What is it? Sort of between 70 and 80.
Roughly aiming for 75 to 80 nautical miles a day, I think is what we kind of settled on.
What defines a nautical mile?
It's 1.83 kilometers.
Okay. And to get a grasp, I mean, like, is that something that's easy? Relatively easy is the wrong word, but is that something that is, can be done quite consistently, or is that a stretch because you had ideas of being on the top spot?
It's
very much down to the weather,
dependent on the conditions. Like you are so insignificant compared to the tides and the winds and everything else. Like, yeah, we had to be rowing constantly to achieve those numbers. There was hardly ever a moment where we weren't, at least one of us was rowing. There was no timeouts apart from about, I think with 10 minutes on Christmas Day, maybe 20 minutes on New Year's Eve. And then once we were in sight of Antiga, we stopped for a bit on the last day. But other than that, it was a constant effort to keep going. So yeah, it doesn't just come. It's got to be, you've got to work pretty hard for it.
What did you do in those moments? You say Christmas Day and New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve, sorry. Moments where are big ceremonial moments in the year, and you get these little 20-minute stops to try and enjoy these days as best you can. Like, what did that look like? What did Christmas Day and New Year's Eve look like for you guys?
Christmas Day, Christmas morning, we at about sunrise, we opened a couple of presents and cards that people had given us. So chocolate orange was from our coach, which was fantastic. And the girls had done us, our partners had done us a sort of photo album, which is a really nice touch. And then on New Year's Eve at sunset, we stopped and we had a whiskey. Which
good, like it.
And then on the
That's
last
also what
day,
Rob's failing to mention is New Year's Eve is his birthday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was a... Carry on, sorry, Rob.
No. Thank you, mate. Yeah, so birthday drinks at sunset, which was great. Nice to sort of, I think Christmas morning, I don't think we really did stop very long at all. So New Year's Eve, that New Year's Eve felt like probably the first time on the trip at that point that we just sort of stopped and sat there and sort of taken it all in. for a few minutes and almost just like breathe the long breath. And it was actually quite nice, quite special to do that. So yeah.
How did that feel? Because I imagine you'd be quite full on.
Sorry, man.
No, saying it must be quite full on until you took that breath. Like, how did that feel at the moment? You've come, a certain distance. I don't know how far along it was before you did that Christmas morning, but that must have all that hard work, and you finally take that little bit of stop. Like, I can't even imagine what that moment must have felt like.
I think, like, to Rob's point, funny enough, Christmas, I don't know why or what we did on Christmas morning, but it just didn't feel like that much of a break. We sort of came up, like, sort of whipped through opening presents and sort of got back on the oars as quickly as possible. It was that New Year's that was the first time that we sort of stopped, properly downed oars, poured a whiskey, everybody sort of sat back, and I think all three of us just went, oh wow, okay, like this is pretty special. This is unbelievable sunset, obviously, nothing else in sight, and just the three of us out on the boat. And I suppose it was also roughly half, not that we really knew it at that stage, but sort of it was roughly halfway as well. It was the first time mentally, I guess, that we'd ever, or certainly for myself, I feel like mentally that we'd taken a break of actually just stopping and just appreciating what was around us or not around us.
I can imagine that being quite incredible as well, seeing a sunset with nothing in the way, though. For every bit of potential scariness it could be being insignificant in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, not having anything blocking your view is something that most people don't really experience.
Yeah. I mean, there was plenty of that. You're right in the middle of the ocean. There's a very, very few people that get to experience that sort of. Even if you're out on a big boat, you up high out of the water. It's a very different experience. We're right down there. You see dolphins swim up underneath you every now and then. You'll be at the bottom of a wave, or a big piece of swell, and it will look like a mountain coming towards you. It's just very unique. Like like you go out on a boat offshore, you never see that sort of thing. It is just very unique.
A little bit different from your average junk boat in Hong Kong, for sure.
Yeah.
But so you, in your post, Martin, because I think you did a really, really succinct write-up of everything you guys kind of went through. You mentioned how much weight you all lost. And, like, how did you feel? How did you eat on the boat? Like, what kind of food did you have during this time? Was it brought to you some way, or was this all stored from day one?
Yeah, it's predominantly these, like, freeze-dried ration packs. And the rest is completely unsupported, so you bring all your own food. You've got a certain amount of calories that you have to bring. What it equates to, I think, is 6,000 per day, and that's for 50-something days. And we sort of knew we were going to take quite a bit shorter than that, so we sort of overeating. It's not very, to be honest, it's not very scientific. You're not really counting your macros, anything like that. You're just trying to shovel as many calories as you can. Whether that be these freeze-dried meals that you're eating, or your what's deemed a snack pack, and you have nuts, chocolates, sweets, and then you'd have like meal replacement shakes. It really is just about trying to get in as many calories as you can. And despite eating sort of between 6,000 and 8,000 calories a day, I think I lost 8, Matt lost 13, and Rob lost 12, or something along those lines. And that's despite trying to eat as much as you can.
I presume it's probably quite easy to pack that food away when you've been working so hard as well. It's not like it's your appetite's really struggling for 6,000 to 8,000 calories a day.
I mean, no, it can actually get quite difficult to eat. That's a lot of food. You're obviously far hungrier than you would be otherwise, but once you're eating your 5th chocolate bar of the day, it's not really that. It's not really about enjoying food anymore. It's about just trying to get your nutrition in.
Yeah. So coming into the closing stretch, talk to me about how it felt coming up towards Antiga and arriving at that finish line after such a long time.
Yeah, it's.
I think, like, I'm sort of alluding to a little bit what I said earlier, that we sort of got into this foot race with this team trying to come in, that was coming on pretty strongly behind us. It was only, I think, it was sort of, we were just doing equations every day about how fast we had to go, how fast they could go, until we sort of knew. And you sort of push, and then, when a week out, you're like, I'm pretty sure we've got this, but if we slack off, they can. And so it was just that kind of conversation every day until like 3 days to go. We were sort of like, okay, we've pretty much got it, but if something goes wrong, then they can catch. So it was just all the way up until sort of the last afternoon or last day. Really, it was just this kind of just push. So it was only really, I think Rob mentioned earlier, on the last day we stopped. It was probably about 10 hours before we finished. And we knew they weren't going to catch us, and that was fine. But that was probably the first of the, as you said, the approach to Antiga. That was the only time where we really went, okay, like, kick back. Now we went for a swim, had a sort of long chat about what we'd done and what it meant and that kind of thing. So that was, that period, that afternoon was certainly a highlight on the trip, and realizing that it was done, but having one last moment together of sort of just the three of us before rejoining the normal world.
You can actually enjoy it, I suppose, for that last little home stretch in a weird way, because you know it's the home stretch. You've beaten this team, and you can sort of go, right, one last sort of push, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty special. Like when you first, like when you see Antiga finally, and then we ended up finishing at sort of 2 a.m. So as we're coming in, just being able to see the lights on the cliffs on the side of Antiga, yeah, just an incredible feeling. Like sort of like, yeah, just absolute elation that you've made it, and you're gonna get there, and you're gonna see your friends and family, and then they send out the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard boat comes out to join you, sort of shepherd you into Nelson's Harbour. So you see the flashing lights of that when you're probably a mile or two offshore. And it's just a really, really special feeling.
I suppose as well, coming off, I know that some of you said you hadn't seen family for a long period of time due to the pandemic because of this. Like, how was it, like, reuniting with family after the pandemic is a big moment for everyone in the normal circumstances. But how did it feel doing that after coming off this amazing accomplishment?
Yeah, I think for Matt and I, we both haven't seen our parents for 2.5 years. My girlfriend was also over there. Luckily, my dad had never met my girlfriend, so that was great. They could introduce themselves to each other. I don't have to do anything.
Is this your way of getting out of it? It's like, sorry, I can't be there, lads. Let's row the Atlantic. I don't want to be around for this meetup.
Exactly. That was incredibly special. And then we spent I think a good 10 days in Antigua, just sort of unwinding and being able to spend a long time with family was incredible. It was amazing.
It's quite a surreal experience. Like I just never in my, like, even though it was going to happen, and but you don't expect to be reunited on a dock at 2:30 in the morning, having just rowed for 37 days with your parents that you haven't seen for 2.5 years because of the global pandemic. Like, that is not a sentence you ever think you're ever going to say in your life. But yeah, it was very, very cool.
Do you think the pandemic almost made this extra special, this moment, because it was a time where people normally are going through all sorts of struggles, and you've managed to create a positive out of something that could have been horrendous, like it was for so many people?
I think sort of the probably the biggest effect two biggest effects for us is one, as Rob said, there were a number of things, like the stars aligned for us. You know how Hong Kong is. You travel a lot, and there's a whole lot of other demands on your time, and but we basically had a 2-year window where we couldn't really go anywhere, and there wasn't a huge much else to do, so we could really throw ourselves into this, with the gusto it deserved. But yeah, and then I guess from our perspective, as you say, that sort of reuniting and the end was just an added edge of emotion to something that is already quite emotional.
Yeah, I think maybe we didn't appreciate it at the time, but when we look back at it, a lot of people will see those 2 years or those 18 months as sort of dead time where they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything, they didn't see families, people didn't leave their flats, people didn't go to work, whatever it was. Whereas we'll forever be able to look back on that time as this journey, doing everything to get ready and then going and doing it. And yeah, stars aligns absolutely the right word for it. But we, just really, really lucky looking back that we were able to find a positive out of that time that was so difficult for so many.
How did it feel in the sort of like the weeks, months following the event? I know a lot of people, when they embark on sort of these big things where they've spent all their time training for it and working hard for it, and then obviously a long time doing it, like Olympians get this thing called gold medal syndrome, where their whole focus has been on this one event, and then it's over, and then you still gotta go to work, and you still got to do your day-to-day things, you still got to go to the shops. Did any of you experience that sort of drop following this event, where all your focus was on this, and then that was already done, or did it just carry on up from there, the accomplishment that you'd done?
Hasn't quite kicked in yet, to be honest. It's quite good. I appreciated being able to eat a solid meal and get 8 hours of sleep. Yeah, it's quite funny when I think you've read the post, and some people I've spoken to say, it comes across as not as positive as they would have thought it would be. And when I got off the ocean, I was asked, would you ever do something like that again? And I pretty firmly said, no, essentially. And I think like over time, you start to appreciate the achievements. There's sort of a sense of what you've done. And now the answer is probably not as simple. I think now you sort of, there is a bit of a itch there, and maybe something that will need to be scratched someday. I'm not saying in the next 5 years, but someday. I see Matt nodding in the corner there. I'm like, no, not yet.
They always say that, though. It's like women after giving birth, isn't it? They go, never again. And then all of a sudden you just remember how happy the child makes you. You forget the actual pain of the day. And it's, as it softens, you'll just remember how good it felt arriving at Antiga, and you won't remember all the tough days in between.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to sort of close off, obviously, I know, Rob, you've got a call in a few minutes. So normally to close out these shows, most people are promoting something. They're promoting a business or a brand. If you want to promote something, I'll go round, then feel free to do it. Thank you very much for your time. But for each of you, you're going to give one piece of advice or takeaway, or if someone came and asked you, should I do it? What would you say? I'll start with Rob first. A closing message.
One closing message would probably be, there's a proverb about the Irish lads that came to a wall they thought they couldn't climb. So they tossed their caps over it, and then they had no choice but to get on and do it. I think we just decided we were going to do it, told people, and then we had no choice. So yeah, absolutely. All of these things start with one step. Just get on with it and give it a go. Don't look back in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or however long and say, I wanted to do that, or I wish I'd done it. And then to promote something, there's a couple of guys in Hong Kong, Ben Cullen and George Fleming, are doing 1 million meters on rowing machines for Movember. Obviously raising money for awareness for men's suicide. So yeah, if anyone out there is listening to this and you can support them, they're on Instagram, 1 million meter men, and donate to them for another amazing rowing challenge.
Oh, that's a charity very close, an awareness campaign very close to my heart. So, Rob, if you send me any details you've got of that after this, I dropped your message on Instagram yesterday. So if you find that, just send me anything, and I'll put it in the show notes, and I'll definitely promote the hell out of that.
Will do. Thanks, mate.
Matt, I'll go to you.
I guess following on from Rob is almost identical. It's like you don't realize what you can do as if you just commit to something. We had no idea how to row. We had no idea really what the challenge presented itself, but we just committed to doing it. And don't give yourself a chance to back out and throw your cap over the wall. You'll get there. And then, I guess one thing as well, this isn't just the three of us that got over, that rode across the ocean. We were helped by a huge amount of people. So, just thank you. People like Cathay Pacific Cargo who flew our boat from Hong Kong to the start line. We wouldn't have been anywhere near, without them. We wouldn't have been able to row the ocean. Our numerous sponsors, Gavkel, JP Morgan, the guys from Joint Dynamics, just the list of people that contributed here just with a piece of advice or were happy to have a call with us. Was just amazing. So thank you to all those people who helped us out.
Yeah, very much so. Martin?
I think apart from what the other guys have said, just find a good team. It helps a lot to be doing something that's challenging with guys that you can actually get along with and guys that that'll stick up their hands. And also disposable toilet bags are a good tip for any.
I'm so glad I came to you last.
So niche.
For anyone doing this race, it's not on the prerequisite kit, but it is the biggest game changer.
How did you know about it? Is this just a fetish of yours? You just like, if you can't be bothered getting up and going to the loo, you're just like, I've got a bag by the sofa, I'm good to go.
No, I think someone suggested it to Matt.
Yeah. Where a previous rower had mentioned that, not having to clean out your bucket during the day is just one of the biggest morale boosters. Those bags got ordered quick sticks after that.
Well, I think on that note, on that best piece of advice you could have ever given anybody, thank you guys so much for your time. An incredible achievement. And I said, as soon as I heard this, there's not many things I remember when I'm semi-pissed. And the fact that I remembered this to drop Tim Sutton a message and was like, hey, how do I find these guys that rode the Atlantic? And he was like, he hooked me up with you guys. I was like, okay, I've definitely got to tell this story because it's not something you hear every day. So a massive well done to all of you. It's an incredible achievement.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much.
Guys, thank you very much for watching the podcast. If you're like me and like to binge watch podcast episodes, click here for our most recent episode. And if you enjoy the show and want to be updated when new videos come live, click here to subscribe to the channel.